Alrighty, guys. Tonight, Jim McGlone is back with us, and I will read his bio. Jim McGlone has a PhD in human ecology, also known as economics, from Virginia Tech, and a master's certificate in environmental law and policy from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Graduate School. A self-taught naturalist and ecologist, he has managed the natural resources of a 500-acre park in Fairfax County as a retired urban forest conservationist with the Virginia Department of Forestry in Northern Virginia. He continues to teach environmental stewardship through TreeStewards, master naturalists, master gardeners, and other groups. He and his wife have been practicing conservation landscaping since 2005 and removed turf grass from their property in 2008. He's a certified arborist and has a tree risk assessment qualification, both through the International Society of Arboriculture. Without any further ado, here's Jim.
Well, thank you. Good evening, and I'm glad to be back with you tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about tree diagnostics, and this is going to be sort of things you should be looking out for and how you could talk with somebody from the public who asks, "What's wrong with my tree?" Before we get into that, I do have, and let's get this thing back on. So there is a big caveat. This is a direct quote from the Tree Stewards Manual. Volunteers shall not use nor make specific recommendations for chemicals or fertilizer on public areas or on private property other than their own. What that means is you can say, well, yes, there are pesticides you could treat this problem with, or maybe you might need fertilizer, but you need to direct them in that case to DOF employee, Virginia Cooperative Extension, some professional who is certified to make those recommendations. Okay? So you're not supposed to say, well, yes, you should treat this with a specific chemical, whether it's a specific active ingredient or a specific product that's available on the market. That being said, why do urban trees get sick? One of the big reasons is poor tree care, and that's what hopefully we are trying to take care of. Another is that they could be getting too much water or too little water. They might not have been planted properly. There might be girdling roots. They might put the wrong tree or the right tree in the wrong place where there's not proper drainage for the species or the wrong pH for the species. It may just be that it's not a good tree. A big one that's coming around is excessive heat, insufficient root space. All of these things come down to one thing in particular, and that is stress. So just as it can be stressful for human beings to live in an urban environment, it is stressful for trees to live in an urban environment. And when you add these other things in, that just increases the stress. So mainly what we're going to be talking about is things that happen because trees are stressed. But before we get into that, I want to make sure we all have the same vocabulary so that when I say primary pest or disease, you know I'm talking about something that can kill an otherwise healthy tree. Usually these are non-native pests or diseases that the tree has not evolved with. Because when the tree has evolved with pests or diseases, they usually are secondary. They only attack stressed or weakened trees. Healthy trees are able to fend off these pests and diseases. And again, in this case, we're usually talking about a native pathogen, a native pest, something that the trees have co-evolved with. Now, things that affect trees can be biotic. These are living organisms, usually in the form of a fungi, a bacteria, or an insect. However, there is one large biotic organism that will attack trees named white-tailed deer. We're not going to get into what to do with white-tailed deer. If you want, I can just send me an email and I'll send you my recipe for venison stew. There are also abiotic factors. These are non-living things. It can be weather, it can be construction damage, bad care, herbicides. These are things that are not a living organism that can affect the health and well-being of the tree. One of the things that we still talk about, but is starting to go away in favor of just it's out there, is signs and symptoms. Mainly, these are visual indicators that something is going on, either a pest or a disease. A sign is usually something like frass, which could be any of a number of insects. So it's not really a symptom. Symptoms tend to be more, or we tend to think of them as more related to a specific biotic organism, something that's changing it. So, and as you can see in these things, leaf spots could be caused by a lot of different organisms. Small leaves is a sign of stress that could be biotic or abiotic. So these things, we just talk about them as signs or symptoms without worrying too much about whether it's a sign or a symptom. It's something that indicates there's something wrong with the tree. The preferred method of dealing with trees that are sick is integrated pest management. A lot of people know about Silent Spring. I would suspect that not nearly as many people have actually read the book and think that the message of the book is we should not use pesticides. That's not the message from the book. The message is that we should use pesticides sparingly, and we should understand all of the ramifications of this. So the response to Silent Spring was integrated pest management. And the first premise of integrated pest management is no organism is inherently a pest. Spotted lanternfly is not inherently a pest. It's only when the population of the organism reaches a level that is causing ecological, economic, or aesthetic damage that we start to have a pest problem. And the response is to knock that population back to a level where we don't consider that it is having ecological, economic, or aesthetic damage. And as it happens with spotted lanternfly, that is actually happening. We're starting to see greater predation of the spotted lanternfly. It is becoming less of at least an ecological and aesthetic problem. I suspect it will continue to be an economic pest for a long time, given the damage it's doing in vineyards and in orchards. When we address pests, we want to use first cultural. Is there something that's going on? For example, if mosquitoes are a pest in your yard, a cultural practice is to go through your yard, do an inventory, and get rid of any standing water where the mosquitoes can breed. Then you use biological responses. Conservation landscape is a great type of integrated pest management because what you're doing there is by having lots of native plants in your landscape, you are attracting potential pests, but you're also attracting a lot of biological controls in the form of predatory insects and spiders and birds that will keep those insects from becoming a pest. Your last resort is chemicals. And sometimes you do need to use chemicals. But in general, you've got to use them very carefully so that you don't become dependent on them. So in terms of diagnostics, the first step is to figure out, am I looking at a biotic problem or an abiotic problem? And the simple way of doing that is biotic pests and diseases are usually restricted to a species or a genus. So if, for example, you go to somebody's yard and their maple and their oak are both exhibiting the same symptoms or signs, it's probably an abiotic factor that's causing that rather than a biotic factor, because the things that attack maples are different from the things that attack oaks. Biotic factors are going to affect all or most of the plants in an area. For example, a heavy wet snow is a biotic factor because it's affecting all of the plants there. It's with a loading issue. All right, let's see. If you, by the way, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I will stop periodically to check the chat and see if there are any questions in it. Without questions, I will move on. One of the big things that you as tree stewards should know about is oak decline syndrome. So this is a process that includes both abiotic and biotic factors. And it's a process that starts with a stressor on the oak trees. It could be drought. It could be turf. Turf is very stressful to trees because it suppresses tree root growth. It could be heat. I would expect we're going to see some more calls about oaks dying next year because of the heat we've had this summer. It could be too much. It could be water. We haven't had a big problem with water. In fact, we're probably behind a little on water. But back in 2018 and into 2017 into 2018, we got way more rain than we should have. We were at 150% of normal rainfall, and that's stressful on the tree. The things we've seen with the what do they call that thing? The Arctic, when the in the winter, when the God, forgetting all my meteorology. In the winter, when the jet stream dips down low and we get these blasts of Arctic air, followed the next day by
polar vortex.
Polar vortex, that's it. Which has actually been up there for millennia, but the jet stream has kept it up in Canada, and now it's coming down into the States. Those kinds of fluctuations in the winter can be particularly hard on the tree. Salt for de-icing, defoliation. This picture was taken in May. These trees should be fully leafed out. The fall cankerworm has eaten all of the leaves except the hollies and the smilax and probably some non-native invasive species there. All of these things can be stressful. And if the tree gets stressed, then it's going to have a weakened response to endemic attackers like armillaria root rot. Armillaria is endemic to the area. It's all over the place. Two-line chestnut borer is another insect that is endemic, and oak trees know how to deal with them when they are healthy. Once they start getting stressed, they go into this cycle of repeated stressors, and eventually they spin in and die. But this is a process that can sometimes take a decade or more. The final stage is usually hypoxylin canker. Hypoxylin is a genus rather than a species, so it's always this kind of flat patchy thing on the outside. Can be gray, it can be black, it can be brown. This is endemic. There are probably spores for hypoxylin canker in almost every tree. It's just that when they're healthy, they can fight it off. When you see this, you know the tree is nearly dead, and it doesn't come in until it is dead. So that's the process. That's what's killing our oak trees. And we don't have any non-native oak pests or pathogens. So, for example, you might hear about oak wilt, which is caused by a specific fungus. It's not present in Virginia at this time. So people are seeing spotted lanternflies. I was out doing a non-native invasive species removal with a bunch of Boy Scouts out at the scout camp in Prince William County. And I stopped this big ailanthus tree, and there were spotted lanternfly all over. I could even see them squirting the sugar water out their butts. And there were also a lot of bees and wasps on the tree that were eating that stuff. But the good news is, as I said, we're starting to see a lot more predation. One guy I worked with at the Department of Forestry lives out in Winchester, and he said they're not nearly as bad as they had been. All right, the last time I saw you, we talked about the tree energy model, and just to remind you, this is what it looked like. So you have the leaves, which are producing sugars, using water and carbon monoxide or dioxide, and the sugars go either to living cells or they go into storage, and then nutrients and oxygen coming from the root system into those living cells that are using the sugar, the nutrients, and the oxygen to make tissues and maintenance and toxins. In other words, perform the life functions of the cell. And you can use this to figure out where your problems are and what's going on. So, for example, this was a maple tree. I'm glad I've got this picture because they have since cut down this tree. But you can see this big dead stub here. And what happened there was water and sugar from the roots up to the leaves got cut off when this piece of guying, there's a wire inside this hose, and it girdled the top of this tree. The result was then that part of the tree died, and the tree made new branches below that obstruction. So when you see the tree dying uniformly from the top down, that generally means something in the trunk has interrupted the flow of water and or nutrients to the canopy of the tree. Depending on how high up it is and the species, it may recover by simply, and you can see all of this other growth was the response to the girdling, which was at about 4 or 5 feet. On the other hand, you might see something like this. Here we have a lot of sprouts coming out on the larger trees. What that is generally is a sign that somewhere up in the tips of these branches, that flow of water and nutrients has been interrupted, causing the terminal buds to die and releasing these sprouts. But you've got to have water getting up here to support these sprouts. So, water is getting at least part of the way up the tree. So this is something that is occurring in the canopy that is killing the tips of the branches. On the other hand, you might see something like this, where you have the canopy, and here I have duplicated it, but only one part of the canopy is dying. And that's an indication then that the structural branch associated with this piece of the canopy has something that has happened to it to prevent the water and nutrients. And beginning to see how we can use this energy model to figure out where the problem is in the tree. In this case, you're probably looking at something like a vascular wilt. Dutch elm disease will attack it this way, where you have this kind of asymmetric dieback in the canopy. It's usually something that's affecting the scaffold branches of the other large branches of the tree. And that's represented in this model by cutting off the flow of water to that part of the tree. So what's causing this kind of sprouting and death above the top of the tree? Well, I've already mentioned vascular wilts. So things like elm yellow, Dutch elm disease, oak wilt, which I would again say we do not have in Virginia. It can be insect attack like an emerald ash borer or the two-line chestnut borer if it happens to be a tree that's already stressed. This actually is emerald ash borer that's killing the top of the canopy and releasing the sprouts down here. And then there are things like thousand canker disease, and I probably should have put Dutch elm disease in this list too, because thousand canker disease is carried by walnut twig beetles, and they carry this fungus, Geosmithia morbidida. And so it takes both the insect and the fungus. And as it happens, because of the life cycle of these walnut twig beetles, as soon as they are hatched, they're infested with Geosmithia morbidida, because that's what they eat as larvae, is tissue killed by that fungus. Dutch elm disease is also carried by an insect vector called an elm bark beetle. So that's what happens when you start to see either asymmetric canopy dieback, or you start to see a lot of sprouting and you can't explain it by new sun exposure. It's generally something that is attacking the canopy, like these types of vascular wilt or insects. On the other hand, when you see a tree like this, and notice the the leaves up here, this is not just because it's fall and it's not cued in simply because all the other trees in the picture still have leaves on them. Leaf drop requires energy. If the leaves die or the branch dies while the leaves are on them, they do not drop. So if you see dead leaves in the canopy, that's an indication that something up there is dying. When the whole canopy like this is dying, then that generally indicates there's something going on either in the root system or the base of the trunk that is preventing water and nutrients from getting up into the canopy of the tree. Some of the things that can do this are root rot, particularly Armillaria, butt rot, mechanical damage at the base of the tree, which eventually girdles the whole bottom. And in urban areas, it's girdling roots. So this is what butt rot looks like. This was the base of the tree. You can see the discoloration in the heartwood. This tree had butt rot. You couldn't tell just until it was cut down. On the other hand, you might see something like this, which is called bottle butt. And what this is an indication of is the entire butt of the tree, the base of the tree, has rotted away and is causing stress on the cambium here, which causes the tree to build this structure to compensate for the loss of the heartwood here in the base of the tree. This frequently is an indication that there's also root rot. And frequently these two things can be caused by the same organism that gets in through the root system and then starts moving up into the trunk of the tree. All right. Any questions so far on issues that you might encounter involving the whole tree or the branches or large parts of the canopy? All right, let's talk about leaf problems. So this is actually a picture I got from someone that I knew in Fairfax County. She sent me this picture and said, "What's eating my oak leaves?" Well, first of all, the whole point of planting native trees is to attract things that are going to eat your leaves. And remember, I said it's not a pest until the population gets so high it's causing some sort of damage. And so my response to her was there were about 500 different caterpillars that ate oak leaves, and whatever it is, it's not eating very much because the missing part is probably less than 5% of the total leaf. And trees, hardwood trees, produce about 300%, or not 300, yeah, 300% of the leaf surface area they need for producing carbohydrates for their use and storage. So they can afford to lose a little bit of leaf area to some minor browsing by caterpillars. And one of the things that to keep in mind when you're talking with the public is if there are native trees, you can expect you're going to see some damage like this, but this isn't enough to cause any concern. It's not really hurting the tree. It's not stressing it. It's when you get full when you get full defoliation, the whole leaf is being eaten or it's being eaten down to the petiole, that you should start being concerned about what might be eating your tree. So this is one of the things you need to communicate with the public is a little bit of herbivory, a little bit of leaf fungus or leaf spot is okay. It's not until you get to about 20 or 30% that you're really starting to look at something that is affecting the health of the tree. So you don't need to treat for this. One of the common things you'll run into that people might ask about are galls. So this is an oak gall midge, makes these little galls on the leaves of willow oaks. Obviously, the cypress twig gall midge is working on cypress trees. And you can see, even though it's got a gall there, it's still producing, it's still got needles sticking out that are producing, that are photosynthesizing and making sugars for the tree. So even though you can see there are a lot of them back here, they're not really hurting the health of the tree. The witch hazel cone gall aphid is very common. In fact, this is one of the ways you can identify witch hazel is that it has these witches' hats, galls on the leaves. And this is a small one. This is on black gum. It's caused by a mite. The other leaf problem you frequently have on black gum are leaf miners. And these are little tiny caterpillars that get in, or beetle larvae that'll get in and eat the tissues between the upper and the lower epidermis skin of the leaves. And usually they don't come in, you don't start seeing them until late in the summer when they're not really doing too much damage because the tree is already headed towards going to sleep for the winter. There is a term for that. Unfortunately, my brain is not working very well tonight. One of the more interesting ones are these apple gall. You've got this great big gall here, But when you cut it open, it's mostly empty space. So the insect is right in here. And of course, the thing is that most of these galls are being formed by insects. Occasionally they're formed by fungi or bacteria. But the idea is the insect larva, after the egg hatches, starts producing chemicals that that kind of hijack the mechanics of the tree to produce this gall, and it's there to provide protection for that larva as it grows, and also it's getting some food from the tree. And so, but there are other organisms, usually wasps, that will parasitize the gall makers. And so these empty apple galls, the idea is to make it harder for the parasitizing wasps to inject their eggs into the gall. There are wasps out there that have egg tubes that are long enough to reach all the way into the center. And then just to make things more interesting, there are other wasps that parasitize the parasitic wasps. So you get this whole ecosystem going on inside the wasp or the galls. But they don't, excuse me, I didn't want to move forward. The galls are not causing much damage to the tree. They're more like interesting things to see rather than something you need to worry about treating. On the other hand, there is bacterial leaf scorch. This is caused by, obviously, a bacteria, which advances from the outside of the leaf usually towards the inside, and it doesn't immediately kill cells that it attacks. So what you see are these yellow colored damage, but not completely dead cells at the margin of the necrotic tissue. So this is what bacterial leaf scorch looks like. You'll have this yellow halo around it, whereas other things that might attack the tree will kill the leaves or kill the cells immediately, and you don't get that yellow halo. So bacterial leaf scorch can be found on a lot of different species of trees, particularly sycamore, mulberry, red maple, sugar maple, many oak species, and American elm. Another leaf disease that you might run into on rose family trees is fire blight. It's particularly prevalent on pears. And as you can see from the picture, that's why it's called fire blight. It looks like the leaves, and in this case, the fruit, have been burned. It's caused by bacterium. This is why we have Bradford pear. Back at the beginning of the 20th century, fire blight was devastating the pear orchards in Washington and Oregon. And the Department of Agriculture went out and looked for a pear, a non-native pear that was more resistant to fire blight, so they could try to breed that resistance into the commercial pears. Ironically, one of the primary things I see killing wild calorie pear is fire blight. Another leaf problem are called rusts, and you can see why they're called rusts is because the leaf looks rusty. So there are different rusts, excuse me, that can attack different plants. In the rose family, there is the cedar apple rust, which has corollaries in a number of different rose family plants. So you can get cedar quince rust. This is what it looks like. That rust looks like and these are different organisms. This is what it looks like on the junipers, where it's not causing much trouble. What is really fun is the cedar apple rust. It looks like these little targets on the apple tree, and then and they produce spores which get on the cedar or the Juniperus virginiana, the eastern red cedar. When they're dry, they look like this, but when they get wet, they look like these things from outer space with these orange tentacles, and that's what's producing the spores that then go and infect the apple. It also will affect serviceberry, and as I said, a number of plants in the rose family, but it's generally the same kind of a process. And then we get fungal leaf spot and blotches of various different types. This is fairly common. This is tar spot on maple, septoria. So these are various types of fungal diseases that get in and start killing leaf tissue. Another one is powdery mildew. This is, again, a fungal disease, and particularly on plants like dogwood and lilac and oak. And then a final fungal disease is anthracnose. It's a different species or a different fungus that attacks different trees, but it does it in the same way. Typically, you're going to see dieback of the leaves from the inside out with a lot of these fungal diseases. For many, anthracnose is not, it's a defoliator, but it's not that big a problem because the leaves fall off before the fungus can work its way into the tree. In dogwood, which is actually has two different anthracnose. This one is Elsino species. It's a type of fungus. All it does is cause deformity in the leaves, maybe a little bit of dieback, some spotting. It can also affect, these are not really petals on the flowering dogwood. Those are actually bracts, which are modified leaves. So you can get this Elsino anthracnose or spot anthracnose on the leaves as well as the bracts here. The one that kills is the discal anthracnose. It will attack the bracts, the leaves, but what will happen is it'll get into the stems. So the difference between dogwood anthracnose and a lot of the others is the anthracnose kills the leaves, but they don't fall off the tree, and then it can go down the stem of the leaf or the petiole into the trunk of the tree. When you have, and what we've seen in the wild is trees that are stressed, water stressed, either growing up at the top of the ridge or down below the middle of the ridge. Those trees tend to be more likely to be affected by the discula anthracnose. Also, fire plays a role in this because, as we'll see here, most of these leaf fungal diseases or bacterial diseases are overwintering as spores in the leaf litter. So what fire is doing is it's cleaning out that infected leaf litter, which makes the general rule, if you have a heavy fungal infection, is sanitation. You can prune out particularly heavily infected areas. And in this case, you do want to rake up those affected leaves and send them to a landfill. Do not put them with your yard waste. You want them to go with your garbage to the landfill or the incinerator or wherever your garbage goes. You don't want to send this off to some place where these leaves will be composted and the spores may be spread that way. With the fungal diseases, foliar sprays usually with a copper-based over-the-counter fungicide works. It can help to spray when the symptoms occur, but then usually you want to spray again at the beginning of leaf out next year, because what will happen is the spores will get on the leaves, and as the leaves develop, the fungus will get worse. You should also try to keep your leaves dry. If you've got a really dense foliage, thinning to get more air movement within the crown, and don't use a sprinkler. If you're going to water the tree, use a soaker hose or something that's putting water directly into the soil, not overhead. So, let's see. The tree right outside my bedroom window has so much flea spot. My husband thought it was just how the tree turned for the winter. It's on every leaf. Okay, so this is a case where you definitely want to practice sanitation. You remove all those leaves as they fall, bag them up. Do not send them to the landfill, or do not send them to the yard waste. Send them to the landfill. And Pete, I don't know what you mean by hibernation, except that the spores, as they say here, they can overwinter, and that's why you want to get rid of those infected leaves. Dormancy. Thank you, Noreen. That's the word I was looking for. One of those rusts look like worms. This is why it's important to take a sample, and we'll talk about this later, and have it examined. But if you look at these rusts, because they are fungi, you look up at them under pretty powerful magnification, you can see you can usually see the spore bearing things sticking up. They look like little hairs sticking up that have sometimes they even look like little tiny mushrooms. But you should take it for a specific diagnosis unless you know for certain it's a rust. Bacteria are spread not so much by insects, but by the wind. They also get spread by rain. So if you've got these infected leaves under your tree, when it rains, the raindrops cause the spores to bounce up into the air, and that's how it can infect the next year's leaves. That's why the most important thing, and this is a cultural practice, is sanitation, getting those infected leaves out of the area. Okay. Another thing that you are going to encounter, and we've already talked a little bit about this, are phloem feeders. These are insects in the family Hemiptera. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. We're talking about things like scale, aphids, adelgids, spotted lanternflies. They go through incomplete metamorphosis, which means they don't go egg, larva, pupa, adult. They go egg, they go from eggs to being immature, and over time they get bigger, they shed their outer skin, and they become more like adults. So what that means is as soon as they hatch, they start feeding. And the way they feed is they take that piercing, sucking mouth part and they stick it into a plant, and they start sucking sap out of the plant. Well, sap has this process of feeding can take out lots of sap, but sap has lots of sugars and very few nutrients. So most of these insects have some sort of an organ in there to skim out the nutrients and take out a little bit of the sugar, and then the rest gets ejected from the back end of the digestive system as something we call honeydew. It's basically sugar water. And then what happens is this stuff called sooty mold feeds on that sugar water. And so if you see black spots like this on the top of the leaves, but none on the underside, you should start looking above those leaves with the black spots for the insect, the scale or the aphids or the adelgids or whatever that are producing the honeydew that the sooty mold is growing on. Usually it's not this bad. This is a pretty heavily infected lilac, but look for that sooty mold. That will bring you to and show you where that plant is, or where those feeders are. One of the ones you may encounter is crepe myrtle bark scale. I do know this is in the area. It's a white soft scale. It will bleed red. Because of the soft scale, what you can do is take a white piece of paper and kind of smear it over this the colony, and you'll get lots of red streaks from where you have crushed these things. And you can see the sooty mold on this. Ironically, this is a non-native insect that is attacking a non-native plant. But people love their crepe myrtles, and so they get very upset with that. Another one is gloomy scale. This is actually one of the few primary pests that is a native insect. So gloomy scale is native to North America. It has been feeding on, it has evolved with maples for a long time. But its predators are gone because of the way we are planting these trees. And so you will see these maple trees with black trunks, and that's gloomy scale, which is a little tiny insect that is squirting out that, the honeydew. And this will, this will stress the tree and eventually kill it. And of course, we've already talked about the spotted lanternfly. It falls into this category. These things are called nymphs. There you go. My brain finally got to it. So this is the egg the egg mass. Looks like somebody spread. In my mind, it looks like old bubble gum or old gum that somebody has put on the particularly the bottoms of these trees, but they can be anywhere. When the eggs hatch, they first come out as nymphs that look like this. They go through 3 molts, and then they start looking really sporty with their, being red with white spots. This is the final instar, and then these will molt into the adults. This was the distribution of confirmed spotted lanternfly in June of 2023. As you can see, it has spread somewhat since then. We now have it in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois, where it was not listed before. As I said, what we're starting to see is a decrease in populations. More and more things have added this to the menu. So we are seeing some predation. The indications are that the same thing that happened with brown marmorated stink bugs is going to happen with the spotted lanternfly, where the initial infestation was really bad, but as predation caught up with it, it started to decrease, and you don't hear about brown marmorated stink bugs anymore. One of the interesting things about both spotted lanternfly and brown marmorated stink bugs is one of the ways we treat things like this is biologically. Well, one of the best biological controls for these insects are Chinese praying mantises, which we imported and have been established in the US for over 100 years. So this is a case where we brought in the biocontrol first, and then we brought in the pests. Another one is Hemlock woolly adelgid. This can be, you might encounter this. This is really easy to diagnose. Look on the underside of the hemlock leaves, and you'll see these little cottony, fluffy things here. This has been around, was first reported in Richmond in the 60s and has been spreading up and down the East Coast and can be a big problem in our hemlock forests. A different kind of a phloem feeder is the emerald ash borer. It's things we've talked about so far have been things that are hymenopteran, and they suck sap out of the tree. The emerald ash borer actually feeds on the phloem of the tree. So the larva gets in there and it eats that layer between the bark and the wood of the tree where the cambium and the phloem are. These have really decreased in this area, largely because they've already killed most of the ash in the area. You can treat the ash trees to preventatively, but again, what we're seeing is with a population crash, our native predators, because this insect is in the genus Agrilis, that two-line chestnut borer, bronze birch borer, those are also in the genus Agrilis. So we have predators of that genus, and they have just added this new species to their menu. For phloem feeders, one of the most important things is to have plant diversity. This is going to attract your biocontrols. For example, these are lacewing larvae. My wife sat, there's one here and there's one here, and she sat and she just watched these things gobble up these aphids. And when she came back the next day and looked at the plant, the aphids were all gone, and so were the lacewings. In general, you need to use some kind of a systemic insecticide if you were going to do that or use that. What we're talking about here is we're getting something that gets into the sap of the plant and then doses the insects when they feed. One of the problems is there's a neonicotinoid that's been used or is widely used for this. Unfortunately, what happens is spider mites are not affected by the neonicotinoids. And so what we frequently see after treatment for the aphids or the scale or whatever is an outbreak in spider mites. There are foliar treatments in the form of horticultural oils and soaps. One of the things to be aware of is horticultural oils and soaps, they don't sound too bad, but they are broad spectrum insecticides. So if you spray for aphids, for example, anything that's on the tree can be affected by the horticultural oil or soap. The good news about these things is they only affect what they get sprayed on. It's not like some other, like pyrethroids, where you spray them, they stay on the plant, and then days later, insects that land on the plant or walk through the treated area get dosed. The soapy or the insecticidal soaps and oils only treat what's there when you spray. That's also the downside. If you have soft scales, like that crepe myrtle bark scale, you can use soapy water and a stiff bristled, but not a wire brush, because they're soft. The soapy water will help break down their exoskeletons, and then the brush can disrupt them. Spotted lanternflies are currently laying eggs as we speak. The adults go through the summer, and then as we start to get into the late summer, early fall is when they will start laying their eggs. Nevertheless, if you see one, kill it. Any other questions on phloem feeders? All right, other things to look for. So when you're out there looking at a tree, you can look for insect damage. So this would be a sign of insect activity. This is all called frass. This is a combination of sawdust and insect poop. This is an indication of borers. This is actually a gall. This is all what do they call this? A horned wasp gall. And these things, these particular galls are pretty important to the history of this country and other places. When oak trees form galls, they tend to have very high tannin content, and tannin is used in setting the ink. So there is, you might have heard of iron gall ink, which is what the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and those early documents were written with. And what this is part of the recipe for it. That's the gall in the iron gall ink. And what that does then is it helps the ink actually move into and bind with the fibers of the parchment. This is a leaf roller, so this is an insect. I think the insect is gone. I think that this is either an exit hole or that's a predator's hole. But what the insect does is it rolls up the leaf like this and feeds from the inside, and that affords some protection. So this is something you can, these are different types of insect damage that you might see on a tree. You'd also look for decay. Frequently, you will see decay in this form where you've got conchs that are sticking out from the tree. If there is a branch that has been cut, you can see decay in the form of staining in the wood where it is a different color from the, so this is undecayed wood, but the rest of this is decay from different organisms. One of the things to keep in mind is this is not decay. This is lichen. It does not hurt the tree. It's just growing on the outside of the tree, trying to get up higher into the canopy. On cherry plum and other trees, particularly in the rose family, but particularly in the genus Prunus, is black knot. This is something you will see on the in the smaller branches of the canopy. The thing to do with this is to simply prune it out when it occurs. You might also see environmental issues with the trees, lightning damage here and here. These are frost cracks. Sun scald is caused by killing of the cambium, usually on the southwest side of the tree. The same thing with frost cracks. These things generally do not kill the tree. They can lead to, especially if you got a big open wound from the lightning strike, as long as that lightning strike is going down the outside edge of the tree. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it, but I have seen this where lightning strikes the tree and it goes down through the pit. And then what you see is a seam like this, but it's got what look like toothpicks all blown out from the inside. That does a lot of damage to the inside of the tree and likely is something that needs to come down. But you can see here with these frost cracks, the tree is healing it over. And you start to see these ribs forming where those cracks are. Intervenal chlorosis is very common in particularly in suburbia. This is a yellowing of the leaves between the veins. It indicates either an iron, manganese, or zinc deficiency. If it's iron, it'll start in the young leaves and it'll progress to the older leaves. This is because iron is mobile in the tree. So what's happening is starts in the young leaves and progresses to the older leaves. This is because iron is not mobile in the leaves. And so if it has an iron deficiency, the younger leaves will have chlorosis. Manganese and zinc, on the other hand, start in the older leaf and progress to the younger leaves. These two are mobile in the tree, and so what happens is the tree will mine manganese or zinc from the older leaves as they form younger leaves. It's important that obviously that you know what is driving the chlorosis, because if it's manganese or zinc chlorosis and you give it iron, that's not going to help. So this would be a reason for doing a soil test. It can simply be that you have low soil iron. That's not likely. It's iron that makes our soils red and orange. But if that's the case, you just add iron to it. More often, it's because you have high soil pH. And what that does then is it causes the iron in the soil to form iron oxides that are insoluble, so the tree can't get the iron out of the soil. In that case, adding more iron doesn't do anything unless you're adding it in the form of iron sulfate, which is lowering soil pH. Another potential problem is high phosphorus. This is why we don't want you making any recommendations on chemicals or fertilizer, because if somebody already has high phosphorus in their soil and they fertilize it and add more phosphorus, it can cause these problems. One of the things that phosphorus can do is, again, form iron phosphate, which is in a form that is insoluble and the tree can't take it up. But phosphorus also affects the way trees absorb iron. So high phosphorus can reduce the iron uptake by the plant. So you always want to get a soil test when you think there is some sort of a nutrient problem with the tree, so you can find out what the issue is. One last thing, if you see carpenter ants, they are not hurting your tree, but it is bad. Carpenter ants nest in rotten wood. So if you see carpenter ants in the tree, that means there is rotten wood in the tree. I took this picture of a cross section of a maple branch that failed during a heavy snowstorm. That's why the ants are kind of sluggish, but they came out of this hole, and you can see there was heart rot in that tree or in that branch. And at one point it failed and it split horizontally, or excuse me, split vertically, and exposed this nest. But don't treat for ants. They're not hurting your tree. They're just telling you there's a problem with the tree. Okay. So no questions in the chat, so let's move on. So what you should and shouldn't do when you go out on a homeowner visit, the first thing you want to address is it a problem? You need to know what's normal for the species. For example, and this is one of the reasons urban foresters don't like to use bald cypress, is because they plant them in the spring, and then that fall, they get all these calls that, oh, those trees you planted in the spring are all dying, because people don't realize that bald cypress, even though it is a gymnosperm, is deciduous. So it's perfectly normal for bald cypress to lose its needles in the fall. It's also perfectly normal for American holly and southern magnolia to lose older leaves in the spring. You can give a general indication of the problem. You go back to that, the energy model, and you look at it and you say, okay, from what I'm seeing here, it looks like it's some kind of an insect or a vascular wilt, because you're going to be standing on the ground. You're not going to climb the tree to look for it, but something's happening up in the canopy of the tree that's causing this asymmetrical dieback, that's causing some parts to die back and others not to. You could give a general indication of the treatment options. So you might say, well, this can be treated with a pesticide, or it can be treated some other way. If it's a fungal disease of the leaves, it's perfectly fine to say you really need to rake up all these leaves and send them to the landfill. Don't try to make a specific diagnosis. You don't have the training, and if you misdiagnose it and they treat on that basis and the tree dies, you could be liable, and the chapter could be liable. So look at it, say, this is what I think is going on, and if you see something and you're sure it's a problem, recommend further diagnosis by a certified arborist or Virginia Cooperative Extension. You can collect samples or tell how to collect samples, and you can go to the Virginia Cooperative Extension, take them in for examination and diagnosis that way. So a good sample is going to show the distinct symptoms or signs that you're seeing. It's going to be fresh. So if you're going out, you should learn when Cooperative Extension is, the master gardeners are taking samples, and try to take it that day or the evening before. If they only accept samples on Friday and you're out there on a Saturday, don't collect the sample, put it in your car and drive it around for a week before you take it to the master gardeners. You want something fresh. Take a whole branch or a whole bunch of leaves. If you can, and you're looking at something that's killing plant tissue, get the junction of the live and the dead tissue. You should also know what kind of a plant it is. If you don't know, you should take enough pictures that it can be diagnosed, or it can be identified from those pictures. So make sure, especially one of the things people used to do to me is they would bring in a leaflet from a plant that had compound leaves. I had no idea what the plant, and they wouldn't know what the plant looked like, whether it was a vine, a shrub, or a tree. They just bring in this one leaflet and expect me to be able to identify it. That doesn't work. There is something called the 20 questions for plant problem diagnosis. I believe it's referenced in your training manual. The first thing is, what is the plant? What's normal for the plant? Or you should know some of the common problems of the plant, because that helps you figure out what might be wrong with the plant. And you can read the rest of these questions here and check in your tree stewards manual for what they are. But this is a good thing to have. It's a checklist of a sort, so you can go down through all these things and make sure you're collecting all this information before you are giving a preliminary diagnosis or, well, I think it's this kind of a problem and you need to talk to a certified arborist, or we can check with, I can help you check with Virginia Cooperative Extension to get a specific diagnosis. Some of your resources, the U.S. Forest Service has a lot of online resources that you can use. For example, it's got these pest alerts. These are usually short pamphlets, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 pages long, that will explain what's going on with it and treatment options. You can go to treesaregood.org. This is where trees are good. Yeah, you can go to treesaregood.org. This is the Mid-Atlantic chapter of the ISA. Now that's good tree care. So this is treesaregood.org. This is the International Society of Arboriculture. There is a place there where you can search for an arborist. If you are doing an internet search, put in your keywords, but then end with .edu. And what that will do is bring up university research, not Dave's cockamamie ideas about pests that may or may not have any standing in terms of science. This I did not check, but it used to be the Cooperative Extension Help Desk and Plant Lab was open 9 to noon weekdays at the Shirlington or the Fairlington Community Center. And that's all I had for you. So I am happy to entertain any questions you have.
Could you talk to us at all about gypsy moths? I went hiking this summer and saw a whole forest being decimated by them out along Route 81. And it was like a nightmare. At first I thought they were butterflies, and then I realized what it was. They were covering the trees.
If they had wings, that wasn't the problem.
Ah.
It's the caterpillars. And gypsy moth is one of those things, you know, it's still spreading, and it would be well, it depends on where on 81 you were. So it is the front edge of it is still down in Southwest Virginia. So if you were down in the Blacksburg area or further south in 81, that might have been the case. In this area, gypsy moth has not really been a problem, and actually in most of, well, there have been resurgent outbreaks. There's a fungus that kills the gypsy moth caterpillars in their last instar. And so since that fungus became prevalent back in the mid-80s, we haven't had as much of a problem with it unless we have several dry springs in a row that cause that fungus not to be as active, and therefore the populations will start to expand again. But there are some pretty good controls out there in nature with the gypsy moth.
Thank you.
So
I was near Woodstock, Virginia, actually, off 81.
Yeah, the last I heard, we weren't really having problems with gypsy moth up there, but I'm not with the Department of Forestry, so I don't get all their forest pest health updates. But we do still track it. The Department of Forestry still does flights looking for infestations and defoliation. It's just that mostly it's in the western part of the state and the southern part of the state that we see a lot.
I see. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I've seen where you can buy ladybugs for your garden. Is that, I don't know, a thing?
It is a thing. The problem is that for the most part, the ladybugs are not well trained. So it can be a real challenge to release them in a way where they actually stay in your garden. It's much better to have native plant diversity in your garden, which will attract ladybug populations, and you get the predation that way. My wife and I have been doing this for, conservation landscaping with about 95% of our property is in native plants, and we don't really have any pest problems. Except the mosquitoes, because we have leftover English ivy, and those tiger mosquitoes are breeding in that stuff. But in terms of aphids and things, we'll see a plant that has aphids on it one day, come back the next day, and they're gone.
Hey, Jim,
Yes,
I Googled the extension help desk. I don't know what
yes.
hours you had on your slide. Their website says the VCE Master Gardener Help Desk is now open from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Yep.
We are closed on holidays.
Yeah, that's what I said. 9 to
Okay.
noon, weekdays.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right. So the main message I wanted to get across to you is it's not as important to know what all of these different things are that may attack plants. The idea is to know what that looks like and help guide the landowner, the plant owner, towards the help they need, the professional help they need to do it, because it's not what you guys are trained to do. It's not what you are. And I would guess, Noreen, that you do not have insurance to cover any liability about misdiagnosis and things like that.
No, you're right about that.
Okay. All right. Well,
Can
that's
I
all
just
I
say,
had for you guys tonight.
Jim, I just want to say that I have taken things to the Master Gardener Help Desk at Cooperative Extension over there in Fairlington. And they do, they have an electron microscope. So if you take in a sample, well, during their office hours, they'll look at it under the microscope, and you can watch on the computer screen, you can see the image of what they're looking at under the microscope. And it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, it's a good resource. So,
And yeah, I think it varies from county to county as to just how good they are at doing diagnosis in the county office. I know Fairfax County has an extensive lab, and they've got some really well-trained master gardeners there, so they can frequently do the diagnosis right there. But if they're stumped, then they send it off to Virginia Tech and the plant labs down there.
All righty.
Well,
Yeah, if that's it. Thanks a lot, Jim.
You're welcome.
Always great to have you sharing information with us. Appreciate it deeply. And everyone enjoy the rest of your evening, alrighty?
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jim. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Night.
Bye, everybody.